Hi, I'm David with EV World News, where we talk about electric vehicles, green energy, and the stock markets. Today, I'm in studio with our founder and chief editor, Bill Moore. How's it going, Bill?
I am doing fine. Recovered from my 14-hour shift as a poll worker in the Nebraska primary election this Tuesday. So I'm, and I got a COVID shot. I go to the dentist at 2 o'clock this afternoon to fix a filling. So, hey, it's been a busy day, but I'm doing great. Thank you.
No, oh, geez. Yeah, I bet. I bet. Did you have to keep anybody in line at the polling stations?
No, no. You know what? They passed last election in 22. They passed a law said you is required to show photo ID. So you
Hmm.
either have to show your driver's license, and because Papillion is a has a large retirement community out of the military, so we then had a
Right.
fair number of people. All they had to do was show their military IDs. But that made my job. I'm a clerk, which means
Hmm.
basically that what I did is I sat down, I took their identification, I wrote their name down, and then I identified what ballot to give them. Now, the primary here in Nebraska was really strange, right? So we had a Republican ballot, a
Hmm.
Democratic ballot, which you would assume, nonpartisan, legal marijuana now party. There is such a thing.
Hmm.
And then, so you had those four, and then under those there were another five subsets of ballots. So if you were a nonpartisan, but you wanted to vote for the Republican national campaign, then you had to request that ballot. So I'm sitting there filling in circles and things, trying to keep everybody straight. We had a 200 and I think it was 85 people that came through and voted over that 8 o'clock to 8 o'clock window, and we were only off. And when we got done to the end of the day, we have to tally everything up and make it all balanced. We were only off one person. And try as we might to try to figure out what did we give one ballot too many, or what happened. We never did figure it out. But the judge, the guy that oversees that particular polling, said, "Okay, with one problem, I'm good with that. We're turning everything in." So yeah, it was fun. It was hard work. I got to meet all my neighbors.
Nice.
So
Nice.
yeah.
So let's
Anyway,
talk. Yeah, well, it's something different. You don't do,
you don't do it every day.
every year, every couple of years. Anyways,
Twice
so
this year, though, because I got to do the November one, but that'll be a lot easier because that's only one ballot.
there you go. Yeah, it will be simpler. All right, let's talk about what Cox Automotive says about a second wave of EV shoppers is on the way, but current demand is still a problem.
Yep.
Now, so nearly half, now this is talking about the United States. Okay, so
Yep.
this is a
Yes.
US centered article. Nearly half of car shoppers today are not even considering buying an EV. Today's electric vehicle skeptics are on their way to becoming the next EV buyers. A report that might be cold comfort for Tesla and other EV makers struggling with lower demand. Well, Tesla sees this. People in the EV space, they see this, that people that are opposed to EVs don't realize how much is changing in the space as the tech keeps
Yeah.
cycling and the cars keep becoming cheaper. And we can see that the cars are getting cheaper. The batteries are cheaper to produce. People are always saying we want longer range on the batteries, but as you and I've said, but why?
Yeah.
They already get as much range as a gas car,
And
about the same.
as much or more than your bladder can hold.
Right. So, and the article says EV makers such as Tesla and Rivian are seeing demand for their electric vehicles dry up amid higher prices, and legacy car makers such as Ford have slowed down their EV expansion efforts to focus on cheaper hybrids and other offerings.
Yeah.
And this is a uniquely American phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't happening in the other countries.
No.
And the other countries are far ahead. The United States is several years behind the rest of the world in how EV adoption. Although I saw this thing by Gavin Newsom. He was saying if California was its own country, they would rank somewhere around 6th or 7th or something like that in the world, and EV adoption at 25%.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, if they were their own country, they would be, I think it's either the fourth or the fifth largest global country, globally speaking,
for economy. Yeah.
for economy, yeah, for the size of their economy.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's that as well. But what are they saying? They're saying within the next 10 years, 80% of today's skeptics will be ready to consider an EV as more barriers fall. You know, that puts it out to 2034 and that, but I really think people are going to see huge changes in the next 2-3 years.
Yeah.
Because there's so many changes. It's going to be possible within 10 years, the time difference between filling up with gas and filling up at a supercharger is going to be negligible. We're going to be talking a couple minutes. I did see somebody talking about a lot of EV chargers, though, are not located near where there's bathroom facilities. And that's not very smart thinking,
Yeah,
whoever
well,
put those ones in.
We're starting to learn that now from that bladder size study that was done.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you don't want to go to one and go to the other. I saw some guy, he was interviewing some guy with a Cybertruck pulling out of a gas station, and the guy had stopped to get a slushie, you know.
A slushy or a flushy?
A slushie. I know, he had it in his hand. He wanted a slushie, so he thought I'd go to the gas station.
Yeah.
But it was pretty funny. Let's see. Half of current EV skeptics will consider an EV within 3 to 5 years, according to Cox. I think, you know, once you get over maybe the next election cycle, you're going to have a whole lot less grandstanding, because it doesn't matter who's elected president. Neither of them will be able to run again, because it would be second term for either of them, right?
Right.
So,
exactly.
So I think you're going to see some things go differently in the second term, because they're not running for re-election.
Right.
So you'll see some different politics.
Yeah, and that juggernaut of China ain't gonna let up. You know.
No, it's not.
Ain't gonna let up.
Yeah. So real quick, I wanted to talk about.
Well, can I point out one
go
second
ahead.
before we move? Okay, so it sounds so ominous. Half of all car buyers aren't interested in EVs. But guess what? The other half could be or are interested. So wow, half of new car buyers. So what do? We sell what, 10 million roughly new cars a year, something like that. You know, it fluctuates, but you know, let's say 10 million new cars a year. That's 5 million cars of potential EV buyers, right?
Right.
And what's going to keep them from wanting to take a serious look at that once all the barriers come down? You know, the typical things you hear about. The lady, my coworker next to me, out of the blue, while we're doing the ballot thing, out of the blue says, "What? You're going to have to cost you $20,000 to replace an electric car battery." I can't do that. I hadn't been talking about EVs. I have no idea where that comment came from, but I had to have an intervention and explain to her that's not really a problem that you have to worry about. You know, oh sure, there's the odd battery that has some kind of a malfunction, but pretty much, as you and I know, and we've talked about before, the longevity of these batteries and the durability and the reliability of those batteries has remarkably improved, remarkably so. So don't worry about it.
You know, the funny thing is, it used to be back in the 90s, people expected a gas car to basically be kind of worn out at 100,000 miles.
Yeah.
And there was exceptions, mainly, you know, like Toyotas and Lexus and some of those. But for the most part, that was the expectation. Now it looks like on a Model 3 long range, you're looking at 300,000 miles before replacing the battery.
Yep.
And that's a lot different. That's triple.
That was the point I made to her. I said, look, we got Teslas out there now that are doing 300,000 miles and no battery change and almost no battery degradation. I mean, 5-6%, something like that, battery degradation. So yeah, not a problem.
Yeah, just don't buy an old first generation Nissan Leaf or first generation Chevy Bolt.
wait until, we get a little closer to the 2020s, frame time, 2019 or what. My little Fiat 2016, I get in there and now I'm still showing when I plug it in and unplug it the next morning, I'm still showing well over 100 miles range. Now obviously that depended on how I drive and things like that, but I haven't seen any degradation. That car is only supposed to do 84 miles EPA. And I'm still seeing, 100. I think I had one morning, it was 110, something like that. So not a problem.
Well, maybe you've been driving backwards or something. And
yeah.
So I wanted to talk about, we mentioned China. And so on Monday, a Chinese company called Zeekr, Zeekr, went public in the United States for $5.3 billion.
Amazing.
Now, we've had some EV companies other than Tesla go public here in the United States that were American companies like Lucid and Rivian. But here's, I'm on the Zeekr European website, but here is, these are decent. Now, here's the thing. They're an EV only company. They only make EVs. So their incentive is to not make them ugly. Okay, this is one of my complaints. That a lot of the companies intentionally make their EVs ugly so people won't buy them. And then the dealers complain that they just sit on the lots. Okay, and always those numbers are, the cars aren't, the EVs don't sell, asterisk excludes Tesla. Asterisk excludes Tesla. Okay, so this company has sold 200,000 of these cars already. Those aren't pre-orders; these are delivered cars. Okay, amazing. And when you compare this, Lucid's delivered a few thousand cars. Rivian has probably, between vans and cars, is probably around 20,000 cars. They've already delivered 200,000 cars. This is what American manufacturing needs to be able to compete with. Now, this new 100% tariff is going to keep this out of the United States. But the thing is, the big three don't just sell in the United States. Tesla doesn't just sell in the United States. They sell all over the world, or they try to. Buick, a large part of Buick's business for GM has been in China. Buick makes 4 EVs that they sell in China. And now, after one of the latest car shows, people are coming back and they're saying the U.S. branded EVs just look really cheap compared to the Chinese cars.
Compared to the Chinese, the Buicks in particular were criticized for. One of the journalists who came away from the Beijing Auto Show was saying that how unimpressed he was with the Chinese-built Buick, as opposed to the other Chinese cars. This company, Zeekr, by the way, I think is a unit of Geely.
Geely, they are. Yeah. So Geely owns Volvo and Zeekr.
Polestar.
Oh, and Polestar. Yeah.
And Polestar. Yeah.
So they're big in the EV space, and that parent company Geely, while once again they're not necessarily coming to the United States, Volvo is bringing the EX30 that's made in China to the US, and they're going to sell it for, it's an SUV or a crossover, they're going to sell it for $35,000. That's going to be really tough for other companies to compete with that $35,000 electric SUV. I think that's going to be a huge seller.
And those cars, even though they are assembled, I'm going to use that term, assembled in China, and then they're shipped. God, I don't know, what do they do? They ship them around the Arctic Circle, or how they get them? They get them then to supposedly, quote, Sweden, right, and then from there to the United States. The reason they are probably not going to be impacted by the 100% tariff that President Biden has just enacted. The reason is because they have manufacturing here in the United States, and they export cars from here out of the country, so that qualifies them then as a vehicle exporter, and that sort of nullifies any impact that, at least we think, that the Biden administration 100% tariff is going to cause for the other car companies.
So my next story has to do with one of the arguments you always hear, it's like, well, where is the closest charging station? And it's like, well, there's almost always an electric outlet closer to you than there is
I got one
a gas
there.
station.
I
Yeah.
got one
Yeah.
here.
How far are you from the closest electric outlet? And
Yeah.
people like to think you have to have a supercharger. Well, admittedly, we know that 110, volt electricity is only going to give you about 3 miles of range per hour. Okay.
Right.
Not
Yeah.
going to get you very far.
Yeah.
Okay. But that being said, there's this new app that came out in France, and it's winner of Fast Company's 2024 world-changing ideas. It's kind of like an Airbnb style app
Right.
for using your EV charger at your house to let other people plug in. Plug in. Plug
Right.
in.
Plug
INN.
INN,
Yeah.
right. Like
Yeah.
a tavern
Yeah.
and inn. So,
Now,
yeah.
this has been started in France.
Right.
And
Renault and Sapien.
yeah, and they're mentioning that in this one French village, there aren't any public EV chargers. But if you're driving an electric car through the area, you can use the app to book time with a private charger at someone's home.
Yeah. And that's a pretty, by the way, I looked up some photographs of the village. That's a very pretty little village. So.
Oh, yeah, the village of Guestling, Hemmering.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some who was it? There was somebody fairly significant, I think, a famous French general or something like that, came from there. So.
Well, there's generally somebody famous from just about everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Hey, look, we're in Omaha. Gerald Ford was born here. Gerald Ford was born here.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That wasn't his name when he was born, but that's another story. So.
Yeah. So plug-in is designed to work like Airbnb for EV charging. When drivers take a road trip, they can schedule stops at private chargers along their route, and the homeowners with EV chargers can make a little extra cash. Now, this is in France, okay? Yeah. Eventually, they'll try to put this around the world, and the app appears to be in English, or at least it can be read in English. It does have an
English version, yeah.
Right, and so...
Yep.
Let's see, since it launched last year, more than 75,000 people have downloaded, and more than 1,000 charging points are now listed on it. Yeah. Since chargers are often in a garage or behind a locked gate, the app shares details, including entry codes or instructions to contact the host just before the reserved time. The process can be manual or automated, may involve varying degrees of human interaction. It's a very interesting idea. Now, the problem we have in the United States is that we are 50 independent nations practically in the United States. We have different laws in every state. Utilities are different in every state. And in some states, you can't resell electricity.
Right.
And so that's going to be a problem here in the United States. I'm sure eventually
being one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure eventually new guidelines, rules to be able to allow this will have to get passed, because in most parts of the United States, your local utility is a legal monopoly. And, this has changed over the years. They used to make it so only one company could sell you home phone lines. Then they changed it so that they had to sell the lines or rent the lines cheaper to other companies so they could also sell phone service. Right. Well, I think we're going to see the same thing on this, because this makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's a lot of businesses that have their own private chargers. Not that Amazon's probably going to let anybody use it, but Amazon has 17,000 private chargers. And, that's a lot of chargers. Of course, they probably have a lot of chargers every one of their locations because they have a lot of vans.
Right.
But, there was...
that facility here for our local area is just over the road here. I drove by it Monday. That particular area is really growing crazy fast. And on the way there, I had two of their vans returning back, which assuming they've finished their deliveries and are going to park their vans and charge them up overnight. So yeah.
And well, there was talk at one point about trying to electrify the whole U.S. Postal Fleet. And there's plans to do that eventually. Right. But one of the arguments was people should be able to go in and use the chargers, when the fleet is out and about, and, make that. And that's been kind of questionable too, because their plan is to have them behind.
They're behind chain link fences, which
right.
you would want, because you want your mail secure, facility to be secure, and you want the
Right.
vehicles to be secure. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I've seen lots of discussions on these topics, but eventually I think you're just going to see more and more businesses having charging at work, even if they don't have regular public chargers, for some of their employees to
Right.
use.
Yeah.
So
And the business could open that up if they have the sort of a private or public accessible lot there. They could open up their things and use an app like this, and until they have sufficient numbers of employees using the chargers, make it available, make a little money off of them, return some of the, return a little bit of the investment.
yeah, it used to be. So are you familiar with Turo for the rental cars?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So for a while, when Turo first came out, one of the ideas was you could buy a Model S and you could rent it out on Turo, and you could rent it out for like 10 days to 15 days a month, make a little money, and pay your entire expense of your Model S and basically drive it for free.
Yeah.
And so this was kind of an interesting concept that came out a few years ago. I don't know if that really still applies, but I have dealt with people who had multiple, say, Model 3s on the Turo platform in different cities.
Yeah.
And
there's a few
they did all right
here.
with that.
Yeah, I've looked them up, and there's a few around here that that. So,
but anyways, as an idea for buying a slightly more expensive car than normal, and then renting it out, so many days a month, so that you basically had it for free, and then you had it, 15
now the
days
thing
a
I
month
would
to
love
use.
to know is who covers the liability, the auto insurance. I mean, how is that handled? Because I thought, well, geez, if they can, I've got a car that sits up here. I have two cars. I've got a hybrid and electric car sit up there most of the time. What if I did something like Turo and made it available to people to use? And my State Farm, agent said, nah, you can't do that. If you want to loan it to your friend or a brother or something like that, we'll cover you. But if you're doing a Turo type thing, you won't get any coverage.
I've looked at it. So if you're on their 60-40 split, they're covering everything. Turo is, and you can get it all the way changed to about an 80-20. And on the 80-20, you have to have your own commercial insurance policy. Yeah. So you're basically operating. This would be for somebody who had, say, 10 cars that they were renting out as a small fleet. Right. And then they do that, and then you get a bigger cut because you're paying that insurance yourself. But if you're on the normal one is 60-40, and you don't have to worry about your State Farm.
60 goes to which party?
To you.
To me.
You get 60 and Turo takes 40. Okay. Yeah. And so it doesn't seem like a bad split on there. Yeah. Considering they're taking the risk on the insurance.
Right.
So yes, that's how they address that. Your State Farm guy just wasn't familiar with how it's set up. It's the same thing. Yeah. The ride sharing services like Uber and Lyft, they take a certain percentage of the rider or the commission or whatever, and they use that to cover the insurance on the vehicle.
Yeah, but in this case, you're dealing with the owner operator, for want of a better term. So you kind of know. I'm assuming you've done some vetting of their driver history and their background and things like that. So a little less than a risk for somebody coming down here I don't know saying, "Hey, can I rent your car for the next 5 hours?" Right.
On Turo, if somebody is renting out a really high-end car like a Ferrari or something like that, you'll often see that they won't rent to somebody under age 30.
Yeah.
So you'll see that sometimes. They almost all exclusive, but this is true of almost all rental cars. It's really hard for somebody under 25 to rent a car, and it gets even worse for somebody under 21. And the rental companies want to charge extra money. There's a bunch of things. They want to force you to take the extra insurance and pay the underage driver fees. Yeah. Oh, it can get really nasty for somebody who's like 20 years old trying to rent a car. But let's talk about robotaxis. So real quick, Baidu, somebody will tell me and correct me in the comments at some point. But Baidu's Robotaxi expects to turn profitable next year. Now, this company is only doing Robotaxi services in Beijing. But what's interesting is they did 839,000 rides in the last 3 months of 23. That's almost 10,000 rides per day.
Yeah.
That's a lot of rides in these. So they're collecting a lot of data, getting a lot of rides, and projections come as Musk has emphasized his plans to build up Tesla's Robotaxi efforts amid a decline in revenue. Now, Baidu said its Apollo Go Robotaxi arm expects to turn profitable next year, meaning 25. So I'm sure a lot of it's still going into R&D, things like that. Most of the cars still have a human staff worker inside for safety. Some do and some do not.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was under the impression, like I know we're going to discuss a little bit about Waymo. I'm under the impression that Waymo has almost like a drone operator, somewhere that can take over the vehicle and just drive it remotely.
Yeah, I think in some cases that's I haven't looked that closely at Waymo, so I don't know how the complete details of the operation, but that wouldn't surprise me that they have a center someplace that is monitoring, and if it needs to take over, the driver can take over. So, or the drone operator can take over.
Yeah. So, well, in the case of Baidu, they're saying that 45% of the orders in the fourth quarter in Wuhan were fully driverless, up from 40% in a prior quarter. And
I wonder if you get a choice. You get a little bit better rate if you go with the driverless as opposed to the drone operator, as opposed to the driving assistant, right?
It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What level of assistance do you want? Can I drive it myself? Yeah. Baidu announced its sixth generation Robotaxi will cost equivalent about $28,000, less than half that of the prior generation. So that's really cutting the cost down.
Yeah, they're fine-tuning it, obviously, yeah.
Yeah, this is where the Chinese seem to be excelling, as they keep figuring out how to do things less expensively.
Less expensively and way ahead of the rest of us.
Xpeng Vice Chairman Brian Gu told reporters last month he didn't expect robotaxis to be a real business for at least 5 years. Well, it's hard to say what constitutes a real business. Does it have to be doing billions? So
what's your definition of a real business?
Yeah. All right, let's look at this Heatmap article and we'll discuss it.
Yeah.
So this is 13 ways of looking at Biden's new China tariffs.
Yeah.
And people are welcome to leave, to chat in the comments. We always love to get a little bit of feedback from folks that are watching.
Let me put a proviso. Were you able to put it up? I mean, I've run out of my free pages.
I've got it.
Okay, good. So Heatmap they give you a certain number, and I don't know what that number is. It might be like 4 articles or something a month that you can look at and see the whole article. Otherwise, you have to give them your email and log in, and then if you want a yearly thing, they have a yearly $99 a year, whatever it is. So with that understanding, but this is really, I found that I was able to, I had just enough free articles left that I could read this one. And it really is a fairly balanced view of this. I mean, this is a major decision. It's got a lot of coverage, has gotten a lot of coverage and still is in the media, where the Biden administration has quadrupled the previous administration's tariff on electric cars, solar panels, battery parts, minerals. The cars have quadrupled. The others they've doubled, or they've done some other number with them. But the whole idea being here that we have to somehow stem this tidal wave of well-made but relatively less expensive EV technology and renewable energy technology from wiping out American businesses. So the way that the Biden administration decided to do that, we're going to put these very healthy tariffs on it. But as this article points out, this is not a lopsided thing on our part because the Chinese have done very similar things in the past.
Right.
So there's really those. He makes some really good points in these. So if you can get access to the article and you haven't run out or you're not a subscriber, I'd really take a look at it because it's a fairly balanced view of all of the ramifications of of what this means to the United States, U.S. security, U.S. jobs, U.S. technological laggership, for want of a better term. I don't want to call it leadership because the Chinese, in so many ways, they made a decision, and I would say it probably happened sometime in the late 1990s. I was there in Beijing in 1990 for one of their very first EV conferences in Beijing. And you could sense, and then I went back in 2002 and was able to see some of the things that they were doing that were starting to get a jump on us. While we were over here arguing and killing mandates and building ever bigger SUVs and pickup trucks, Chinese were taking a different approach. They were thinking, we want to dominate. We want to become the world leader in this set of technologies. And dadgummit, they've been doing it, and they're putting us on our backside. So the Biden administration has come in and said, we want to slow things down and give our companies and our people and our businesses and financiers a chance to catch up with them. And that it's not going to be easy, but I guess they felt it had to be done. It's either that or everything you buy has a made in China. I mean, it already is, it seems, but almost everything you buy will be made in China, from high tech to low tech.
It seems that way. Well, and 100% seems, like a bit of overkill. We were at 25%. I was surprised we didn't go to 50. Who knows? For some reason they decided to go all the way to 100.
Well, in the case of the cars you did, in the case of the panels, I think the panels were 50 and the battery material was 25 or something like that. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to selectively, and it doesn't happen immediately. It happens I think it takes effect in 2026. So the idea is that you're giving industry and the planners and so on a chance to develop and finance a roadmap to get us to where we can be competitive with them. Can we do it in that window of time? I don't know. That's a pretty tall order. But again, I'd certainly encourage reading the article and not take a Pollyanna view of what has happened or an over negative view of what this passage means.
Well, let's look at this. Let's see. These EV tariffs may be more for show than anything else. That is not true for the other tariffs on clean technologies. Starting immediately, lithium-ion EV batteries tariff rises from 7.5% to 25%.
Yeah.
For EV battery parts, from 7.5% to 25%.
Yeah.
For critical minerals, from 0 to 25%. For solar cells, from 25 to 50%.
Yep.
Now, so people know, if you think this is going to make it really a lot more expensive to buy solar, doesn't have any impact on it, because what you're paying for solar happens to be what people consider to be the market rate. So
right.
It's not really going to affect that. I've talked before about how I think a lot of solar dealers are kind of a scam because they're charging 5x what it costs to actually do the installation. And that just seems like a little bit too much markup and commission for everybody involved. Okay. But the United States imports more than 80% of its solar panels from Chinese companies operating in other Asian nations.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I know in the US, I know that Sharp, which is a Japanese company, makes solar panels in the US.
Yeah.
So I mean,
yeah. And one of the ideas that I had, following the hurricanes, it's pretty much devastated the power grid in Puerto Rico. I was thinking, if what someone should do is set up, because originally Puerto Rico got this huge sort of financial bubble that was created down there because they were manufacturing pharmaceuticals. So I'm wondering if we could do the same thing, use source the materials to make solar panels, and then you bring those in from wherever you can get them, and then you assemble them in Puerto Rico, which is a territory of the United States, so it doesn't have the same kind of tariff barriers. And then you bring those in, so you're helping the Puerto Rican economy and helping them, recover from the devastation that they experienced, and also keeping you able to bring, more product in at hopefully lower prices.
Well, non-EV lithium-ion batteries, their tariff rising to 25% as well. Now, what it didn't talk about was lithium ferrite phosphate batteries, or sodium ion batteries. Let's see, whether you love them or hate them, you shouldn't see these tariffs as a standalone measure. Let's see, it's often lost that the IRA subsidizes EVs and their constituent parts in two ways, not only with the somewhat convoluted $7,500 personal vehicle credit, but the more important 45X production tax credit, which pays companies $35 for each kilowatt hour of EV batteries they produce in the United States.
Yep.
So, well, a kilowatt hour, if you had a 100 kilowatt hour battery, that would give you $3,500 back of the, those currently are costing around $13,000, I think, is what the wholesale price of those are.
Yeah.
So that's about a 25% break. And there's a 45X bounty on other manufactured goods, including solar panels. Let's see what else we've got here. China followed a similar playbook to develop its own EV industry. That should let us dispel with one foolish idea right away, the premise that tariffs never work. On the contrary, tariffs sometimes do work, as economist Brad Setzer pointed out on X. America's only finds itself in its current position because of how well tariffs worked. Through a range of policies, including tariffs and joint ventures, China walled off its domestic market and encouraged domestic industry. That industry has now grown to challenge the world. Now, earlier I was talking about graphite. So most graphite in the world comes from China, and China has put an export restriction on like the top 3 grades of graphite can't be exported. Okay, which that one was.
Yeah, and I don't think it's so much that they have. I mean, it's a big, territorially speaking, it's a big, diverse country. But I don't think they are the sole source of, the big pot of deposit of graphite that only they have access to. I'm sure there are other facilities. What they did is they saw the handwriting on the wall, and they said, what we need to do is we don't need to export graphite. What we need to export is refined material to make other things. And so I think that's what, that was their vision. Let's just add value to this raw material. And because they could do it cheaper than anybody else, there wasn't any incentive for anyone else around the world to go look for graphite and develop, the resources to refine it and make it battery grade acceptable. Right.
Well, this article is saying we're only here because China has won round 1 on electric vehicles. It's created a thriving, competitive domestic EV industry that includes the BYD Seagull, an $11,000 hatchback that gets 250 miles of range. It's interesting that Seagull looks pretty comparable to the Subaru Solterra or the Toyota BusyForks, and the BusyForks is about $50,000.
Yeah.
That's a pretty startling price. Now, I'm sure the Toyota is nicer, but still, the Zeekr 009, a $70,000 minivan with 500 miles of range. The Xiaomi SU7, a $29,000 coupe. There's some things are going to be a challenge, saying some of this. I mean, that minivan with a 500-mile range is pretty hard to fathom. Let's see, what else we got here? Let's see. It's talking about this makes what is different. This moment is different from the 70s when Japanese-made cars changed the American car market, or in the 90s when Korean brands arrived. I see what's going to happen is we're going to see a lot of competition from companies like VinFast. And, right now we're seeing competition from Hyundai.
Yep.
And, but they're going to start building 300,000 cars a year in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And those are all EVs.
Yeah.
But it still isn't the same as what China is capable of.
They have, as they point out in the article, what China did is they created the equivalent of Silicon Valley for automobiles.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got all these hundreds of companies. Well, we're in the U.S. Well, we had basically a handful, hundreds of companies with very bright people. I mean, I've told this story before. When I was in Beijing in 2002, I met a professor from Eastern Europe who was teaching. Mm-hmm. He was one of Europe's leading authorities on plug-in hybrid architecture. And he'd written a textbook and he'd only sold a few hundred copies or whatever it was, a couple thousand copies of the book in Europe. He'd sold 60,000 copies of that book in China.
Wow.
Now, so that tells you they obviously had a game plan in mind and they're executing it almost flawlessly. Now, of course, the problem they run into now is they're executing too flawlessly because now they got a huge overcapacity problem. And that's also part of the reason. I think he brings up one of the 13, among those 13 reasons is, the Chinese, we're passing this to try to not only help our economy and our people, but also to sort of help them slow down because what they're doing is they're producing all these cars. They're creating all this national debt because ultimately that's what happens. It puts a financial strains on the companies. So, slow down, guys. Let's figure out how to pace this thing so all of us benefit instead of having acres and acres and acres of cars sitting on on an empty lot somewhere on in a port in China.
Right. Oh, I get it. Well, anyways, that was all we had for today, Bill.
Oh, well, we can all kinds of other things we can talk about, but no, that'll do it for today. Thank you to all of you that listened. My next job now is go get whichever side it is, go get what do you call it?
Getting a filling?
Yeah, getting the filling repaired. It broke, and so I need to get it repaired. So,
ouch.
Yeah, it'll be a piece of cake.
All right. Well, anyways, folks, thanks for listening in, and we will see y'all